October 15, 1987. Vincent Castellano had covered the mob for 28 years. He knew the rules. You never make it personal. That's exactly why his joke about Gotti's dead son at the federal courthouse press conference broke every code that kept reporters breathing in New York. "Maybe the kid's better off," Vinny had said, microphones catching every word. "At least he won't have to explain Daddy's business at parent-teacher conferences." The room went silent. Gotti's eyes found his. And in that moment, Vinny realized he'd just signed his daughter's death warrant. What happened over the next 72 hours would rewrite everything the five families understood about loyalty, blood, and the price of truth. The FBI opened 3 new files because of it, and for 30 years afterward, when crime reporters talked about crossing the line, they always came back to this moment. The moment Vinny Castellano learned that some jokes kill more than just the room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The federal courthouse steps felt like a gauntlet as Vinny pushed through the crowd of reporters, photographers, and federal agents. His press badge bounced against his chest with each hurried step, the familiar weight now feeling like a target painted on his back. The October wind cut through his cheap suit, but the chill running down his spine had nothing to do with the weather. "Castellano! Vincent!" Other reporters called after him, their voices a mix of professional curiosity and morbid fascination. They could smell blood in the water, and after 28 years in this business, Vinny knew exactly what that meant. By tonight, his name would be whispered in newsrooms across the city. By tomorrow, it might be carved on a headstone. He fumbled for his keys as he reached his battered Honda Civic, hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The joke had been instinctive, a defense mechanism honed through decades of covering the city's most dangerous men. When you spent your life writing about killers, sometimes dark humor was the only thing standing between you and the abyss. But this time, the abyss was staring back. The drive to his apartment in Bay Ridge passed in a blur of honking horns and red lights. Every black sedan looked suspicious. Every pedestrian in a dark coat could be the one. Vinny had written enough obituaries to know how quickly the mob could move when they wanted someone gone. 3 bullets to the back of the head in a Queens parking lot. A car bomb in Little Italy. Sometimes they made it look like an accident, a slip on the subway platform, a gas leak in the kitchen. His phone was already ringing when he walked through the door of his cramped studio apartment. The red light on his answering machine blinked like an angry eye, counting messages he was afraid to hear. The first 3 were from his editor at the Tribune, each one more frantic than the last. The 4th was from his ex-wife, her voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that came from hearing bad news secondhand. "Vinny, what the hell did you do? Channel 7 just ran a story about some reporter making threats against the Gotti family. Please tell me that wasn't you. Please call me back and tell me my daughter isn't in danger because of your goddamn mouth." 26 years old, fresh out of graduate school, working as a social worker in Queens, with the kind of naive optimism that made Vinny's chest ache with pride and terror in equal measure. She had his stubborn streak and her mother's compassion, a combination that had led her straight into the kind of neighborhood work that put her on the street every day, visible and vulnerable. He dialed her number with fingers that felt like lead weights. "Dad?" Her voice was breathless, like she'd been running. "I just got off work. There was this guy in the parking lot." "What guy?" The words came out sharper than he intended. "I don't know. He was just watching. When I came out of the community center, he was leaning against this black car, smoking a cigarette. Soon as he saw me looking, he got in and drove off. Probably nothing, but after Mom called about some trouble at work." Vinny closed his eyes, feeling the walls of his small apartment pressing in around him. This was how it started. The watching, the following. Little messages to let you know they could reach you anytime, anywhere. And if they could reach you, they could reach the people you loved. "Maria, listen to me carefully. I want you to pack a bag and go stay with your aunt in New Jersey for a few days." "Dad, you're scaring me. What kind of trouble are you in?" "The kind that gets daughters killed to make fathers suffer. The kind that turns 28 years of careful professional distance into a death sentence delivered with a smile." But he couldn't tell her that. Not yet, just some work stuff. Probably nothing, but I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere safe while it blows over." After he hung up, Vinny walked to his kitchen window and pulled back the curtain just enough to scan the street below. A black sedan was parked across from his building, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold air. The driver was a shadow behind tinted glass, but Vinny could feel eyes on him like a physical weight. He let the curtain fall and walked to his desk, where his typewriter sat surrounded by files and photographs from 3 decades of crime reporting. Somewhere in those stacks of paper were the stories that had built his reputation, the careful documentation of violence that had always felt safely distant from his own life. Now that distance had collapsed to nothing. The phone rang again. This time, Vinny let it go to the machine. "Mr. Castellano." The voice was soft, almost polite. "John would like to see you tomorrow. Ravenite Social Club, 2 o'clock, come alone." The line went dead. Outside, the black sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the night, leaving only the certainty that tomorrow would change everything. Vinny stood frozen in his living room, staring at the answering machine's red light as it blinked once more and went dark. The silence that followed felt heavier than the weight of the city pressing down on his building. 2 o'clock at the Ravenite. He'd written about that place dozens of times, the narrow storefront on Mulberry Street where John Gotti held court like some medieval king dispensing justice from a throne made of fear and respect. He pulled out a bottle of Jameson from his kitchen cabinet, the same bottle he'd been nursing for 3 months, saving it for celebrations that never came or disasters that felt too big for beer. Tonight qualified as the latter. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a clean burn, honest in a way that nothing else in his life felt right now. The photographs on his refrigerator seemed to mock him in the dim kitchen light. Maria's graduation from NYU, her bright smile radiant beneath her cap and gown. A snapshot from last Christmas at his sister's house in New Jersey. Maria laughing at something her cousin had said, completely unaware that her father carried secrets that could destroy everything she'd built for herself. He'd been so careful for so long. 40 years of hiding who he really was, where he'd really come from. Vincent Castellano, the crime reporter, was a creation as carefully crafted as any character in the novels he'd once dreamed of writing. The real Vinny, the kid who'd grown up in a tenement in Little Italy, who'd watched his father count stacks of money at the kitchen table while his mother pretended not to see. That person was supposed to be dead and buried, but blood doesn't lie and blood doesn't forget. His father, Salvatore Sal Romano, had been a numbers runner for the Gambino family, back when the neighborhood still felt like the old country and loyalty meant something more than fear. Vinny could still smell his cologne mixed with cigarettes and something else, something metallic that he wouldn't understand until years later when he started covering crime scenes. The smell of violence that clings to men who live close to death. Sal had died when Vinny was 16, 3 bullets to the chest in an alley behind a social club that no longer existed. The official story was a robbery gone wrong, but even at 16, Vinny knew better. His mother had moved them to Bay Ridge within a week, changed their name from Romano to his grandmother's maiden name, Castellano, and spent the rest of her life pretending they'd never lived anywhere else. "You're going to be a writer," she'd told him, gripping his shoulders so tight it hurt. "You're going to use words, not guns. You're going to be clean." And he had been, mostly. Clean enough to build a career documenting the world he'd escaped from, close enough to understand the rhythms and rituals of organized crime, distant enough to sleep at night. Until today. Until one stupid joke had collapsed 40 years of careful construction in the span of 15 seconds. The phone rang again. This time it was Maria. "Dad, I'm packed. Aunt Rose says I can stay as long as I need to." Her voice was steadier now, but he could hear the questions she wasn't asking. "Are you going to tell me what this is really about?" Vinny walked to his window again, peering through the blinds at the empty street below. The black sedan was gone, but that didn't mean the watching had stopped. They were professionals. They knew how to be patient. "You remember when you were little, how I used to tell you stories about growing up in Bay Ridge?" he said finally. "The ones about the ice cream truck and the corner bodega? Of course. Those were lies, sweetheart. I grew up in Little Italy. Different world entirely." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of all the stories he'd never told her, all the truths he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself they weren't real. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked quietly. Because I think my past is about to catch up with me, and I need you to understand that whatever happens, whatever you hear about me in the next few days, the most important thing I ever did was try to keep that world away from you. Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Stay scared. Stay in New Jersey. And Maria? He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. I love you more than my own life. Remember that. After he hung up, Vinny sat at his typewriter and rolled in a fresh sheet of paper. If tomorrow at the Ravenite went badly, if this was his last night as a free man, he wanted to leave something behind. Something true, for once. He began to type, "My name is Vincent Romano, and this is the story I should have told 40 years ago." Outside, October wind rattled the windows like fingers testing locks, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled midnight. The words stared back at him from the typewriter, black letters on white paper that felt like a confession 40 years in the making. Vinny's fingers hovered over the keys, the weight of untold stories pressing down on him like the October wind that continued to rattle his windows. He'd written thousands of articles, hundreds of thousands of words about other people's secrets, other people's sins. Now it was time to excavate his own. He was 3 paragraphs into his father's story when the knock came. 3 soft raps, barely audible over the radiator's hiss. Vinny's hands froze on the keyboard. It was past midnight. Nobody knocked at midnight unless they were bringing bad news or worse intentions. He held his breath, wondering if he'd imagined it, hoping the sound had been a branch against the building or a neighbor's door closing. Then it came again. 3 raps, patient and deliberate. Vinny stood slowly, every muscle in his body screaming at him to grab the phone and call 911. But if they wanted him dead, they wouldn't knock. They'd wait for him to come home, or catch him on the courthouse steps, or simply make him disappear between the subway and his front door. A knock meant they wanted something else. Through the peephole, he saw a woman, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a navy coat that looked expensive. She stood with the kind of posture that suggested authority, but her hands were empty and visible. She looked familiar in a way that made his stomach clench, like seeing a ghost wearing someone else's face. "Mr. Castellano?" Her voice was muffled by the door, but clear enough. "Professional. My name is Angela Romano. I think we need to talk." The name hit him like a physical blow. Romano. His real name, the one he'd buried with his father 40 years ago. Vinny's hand trembled as he undid the chain lock, then the deadbolt, then pulled the door open just wide enough to see her clearly. She had their father's eyes, dark brown, almost black, with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. The face was different, softer, more refined, but the resemblance was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. This was family, blood family, the kind he'd spent 4 decades pretending didn't exist. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "May I come in? What I have to tell you isn't the kind of conversation we should have in a hallway." Vinny stepped back, his legs moving without conscious thought. Angela Romano walked past him into his living room, her eyes taking in the cramped space, the typewriter with its half-finished confession, the empty whiskey glass on the coffee table. She moved like someone comfortable with power, someone used to being the smartest person in the room. "You look like him," she said, settling into his reading chair without invitation. Older, softer around the edges, but the resemblance is there. "Sal always wondered what happened to his boy. Sal died when I was 16. Sal died 3 weeks ago." Angela opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "Lung cancer. Stubborn bastard refused treatment until it was too late. Spent his last days in a hospital in Queens, asking about Vincent Romano. Turns out finding a dead man isn't as easy as it sounds." The room tilted. Vinny gripped the doorframe, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. His father, alive for 40 years while Vinny built a life believing him dead. All those nights wondering if he'd inherited his father's capacity for violence, all those careful steps to avoid the world Sal Romano had inhabited. And the man had been living 20 minutes away in Queens. "That's impossible. I saw the body. I went to the funeral." Angela's smile was bitter. "You saw Tommy Torino. Similar build, similar age, face shot to hell so nobody could tell the difference. Sal needed to disappear fast. There was a contract out on him, and the family thought it was easier to stage his death than try to protect him. Your mother knew. She helped arrange it. My mother. Couldn't tell you the truth because you were 16 and angry and likely to do something stupid like try to find him. So she let you believe he was dead, moved you to Bay Ridge, changed your name, and built you a new life. Sal went underground. New identity, new neighborhood. He became a baker, if you can believe that. Spent 40 years making bread and reading your articles in the Tribune. Vinny sank onto his couch, his legs no longer capable of supporting him. Everything he'd believed about his life, about his father's death, about his mother's sacrifices, was crumbling like old newsprint. Why are you telling me this now? Because yesterday someone walked into Sal's bakery asking questions about Vincent Castellano. Someone who knew about the family connection. Someone who had old photographs of you as a kid standing next to your father outside the Gemini Lounge. Angela leaned forward, her father's eyes boring into his. Sal called me before he died. Made me promise to warn you. Your secret isn't secret anymore. And whoever's digging into your past, they're not doing it out of curiosity. They're doing it to bury you. The envelope sat between them like a loaded gun. Vinny stared at it, afraid to touch something that might contain photographs of a life he'd convinced himself never existed. His hands felt disconnected from his body, everything moving underwater slow. I don't believe you. The words came out hoarse, desperate. You could be anyone. Some con artist who read about the press conference, figured out how to work an angle. Angela reached into the envelope and pulled out a black and white photograph, edges yellowed with age. She placed it on the coffee table between them, careful not to let the whiskey rings stain the paper. Vinny's 16-year-old face stared back at him. He stood next to a man in a dark overcoat outside what he now recognized as the Gemini Lounge, both of them squinting against bright sunlight. His father's hand rested on his shoulder with casual possessiveness, the way men touch things that belong to them. In the background, other figures moved like shadows, men he'd spent 3 decades writing about, photographing from courtroom benches, reducing to column inches and clever headlines. Sal kept this in his wallet for 40 years, Angela said softly, wore it thin around the edges from looking at it. Vinny stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The street below remained empty, but now that felt more ominous than reassuring. Stop talking. I need to think, but thinking felt impossible. His mind kept circling back to the same questions. Who had the photographs? Who knew about Vincent Romano? And why surface now, the day after he'd made a joke that signed his own death warrant? There's more. Angela's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Whoever visited the bakery, they didn't just ask about you. They knew about the Torino switch. They knew about the contract on Sal, about your mother's arrangement with the family. They knew things that only 3 people should have known. What 3 people? Sal, your mother, and Carlo Torino, Tommy's brother, the man who arranged the whole thing. Vinny turned back to face her. Is he still alive? Was, until this morning. Heart attack in his sleep, or so the papers will say. Funny how men with hearts strong enough to survive 60 years in this business suddenly give out when people start asking the right questions. The room felt smaller now, walls pressing in like a closing fist. Vinny walked to his kitchen and splashed cold water on his face, staring at his reflection in the window above the sink. Same face, from the photograph, 40 years older, but carrying the same shadows around the eyes. His father's shadows. Who are you? He called to Angela. Really? What's your connection to all this? I'm your half-sister. Her voice carried no emotion, just facts laid out like evidence. Sal had another family after you disappeared. Different name, different neighborhood, but the same man. I grew up knowing about you, wondering if you were still alive, if you'd found a way out. Another revelation that should have staggered him, but Vinny found he had no capacity left for surprise. The shocks were coming too fast, building on each other until numbness felt like the only defense. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you're up against. Angela stood, smoothing down her coat. This isn't about Gotti. Whatever you said at that press conference was just the trigger. Someone's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. They needed you exposed, vulnerable, with targets painted on everyone you love. Maria. The name escaped his lips like a prayer. Your daughter. Yes. 26, social worker in Queens, lives alone in a garden apartment on Northern Boulevard. Drives a blue Honda Civic, license plate starts with JMK. She stopped for coffee this morning at 7:47 a.m. Same place she stops every Tuesday. Creature of habit, just like her father. Ice water ran through Vinny's veins. How do you know that? Because I've been watching her for 3 days trying to figure out if she's safe. She's not. None of you are safe, because whoever's orchestrating this, they don't just want you dead. They want you destroyed first. Reputation, family, everything you've built. They want it all torn down before they put you in the ground. Angela moved toward the door, then stopped. The meeting tomorrow at the Ravenite? Don't go. Whatever you think you can accomplish by talking to Gotti, you're wrong. He's not your enemy in this. But someone wants you to think he is. Then who? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. Sal asked me to give you something else. She pulled a small bakery box from her coat pocket, white cardboard tied with string. Cannoli. He made them himself the day before he died. Said you used to love them when you were little. The box felt heavier than it should have, weighted with 40 years of missed conversations, missed birthdays, missed chances to know the man who'd shaped his life by disappearing from it. Angela. His voice cracked on her name. If my father was alive all this time, why didn't he ever? Because loving someone sometimes means staying dead to them. Her smile was sad, distant. He read every article you ever wrote. He was proud of what you became, proud that you got out clean. Until yesterday, he thought you'd stay out. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Vinny alone with a box of cannoli and the growing certainty that his carefully constructed life was collapsing faster than he could shore up the pieces. The cannoli box sat on Vinny's kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. He'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, afraid to untie the string, afraid of what memories might spill out with the powdered sugar and ricotta. His father's hands making these same pastries, rolling the shells, mixing the filling with the careful precision Vinny remembered from watching him count money at their old kitchen table. 40 years of believing Sal Romano was rotting in Calvary Cemetery, and the bastard had been alive, baking bread in Queens, reading every word Vinny wrote. The betrayal tasted bitter as burnt coffee. Not just his father's betrayal, though that cut deep enough, but his mother's. Every time he'd asked about Sal, every anniversary of his supposed death that she'd marked with tears and flowers at an empty grave, she'd known the truth. The string came apart in his fingers, and inside the box, nestled between two perfect cannoli, was a folded piece of paper. Vinny's hands shook as he opened it, recognizing his father's careful script even after all these years. Vincent, if you're reading this, I'm gone and the secret's out. I know you hate me. You should. But before they come for you, there's something you need to know about the night I died. Tommy Torino didn't volunteer to take my place. He was already dead when we put him in that alley, shot by the same man who was supposed to kill me. Your Uncle Anthony made the switch to save my life, but he's been paying for it ever since. Every month for 40 years, bleeding money to keep that secret buried. Now someone's squeezing him dry, and they know about you, about Maria. Anthony's desperate enough to do something stupid. Watch your back, son. Blood doesn't always mean family. Senior. The letter trembled in Vinny's hands. Uncle Anthony, his mother's younger brother, the one who'd helped them move to Bay Ridge, who'd co-signed the lease on their first apartment, who'd somehow always had money for Vinny's school clothes and Maria's Christmas presents. Anthony Torino. Christ, he'd never made the connection to Tommy, never thought to wonder why his uncle changed his name to Castellano around the same time they did. The phone rang, sharp and insistent in the pre-dawn quiet. Vinny lunged for it, expecting Maria's voice, or maybe Angela calling with more revelations to shatter what remained of his worldview. Vinny? Thank God you're there. Anthony's voice was thick with whiskey and fear. I tried calling earlier, but Jesus, this is all falling apart. Uncle Anthony. The title felt different now, weighted with new meaning. Where are you? Brooklyn. Listen to me carefully. Someone came to see me tonight. Someone who knows about Tommy, about the money, about everything. They want you at the Williamsburg Bridge tomorrow night, 11 o'clock. Come alone, or they start sending pieces of Maria to the Tribune. The world tilted sideways. What are you talking about? Maria's safe. She's in New Jersey with... She left Rose's house 3 hours ago. Said she was going back to her apartment to get something she forgot. Vinny, they have her. The phone slipped from Vinny's fingers, clattering against the kitchen floor. He could hear Anthony's voice still talking, pleading, explaining, but the words sounded underwater distant. They had Maria. While he'd been sitting here eating his father's cannoli and feeling sorry for himself, they'd taken his daughter. He snatched the phone back up. What do they want? You, at the bridge. But Vinny, there's something else. Something I should have told you 40 years ago. Anthony's breathing was labored, like a man dying of guilt. That contract on your father, I'm the one who ordered it. The confession hit like a physical blow. What? Sal was skimming. Not much, just enough to put you through school, give you chances he never had. But the family found out, and they wanted an example made. So I volunteered to handle it. My own brother-in-law. Vinny gripped the phone so tight his knuckles went white. Why? Because I was in love with your mother. Had been since we were kids. I thought with Sal gone, she'd finally see me, choose me. Instead, she spent the rest of her life mourning a ghost and raising another man's son. The pieces were falling into place now, ugly and inevitable as dominoes. You've been paying blackmail for 40 years to cover up murdering the wrong man. And now someone's using that to destroy you. They know I'll do anything to keep the truth buried, including delivering my nephew to them gift-wrapped. Anthony's voice broke. I'm sorry, Vinny. I'm so goddamn sorry for all of it. Who is it? Who's pulling the strings? But the line was already dead, leaving Vinny alone with his father's letter and the terrible understanding that 40 years of lies were finally demanding payment in blood. The silence after the dial tone stretched like a held breath. Vinny set the phone down carefully, his mind racing through 40 years of carefully constructed lies, each revelation reshaping memories he'd thought were carved in stone. Anthony, the man who'd played father when Sal disappeared, who'd taught him to throw a curveball and slip a punch, who'd walked him down the aisle at his wedding, had been the architect of his own orphaning. But something felt wrong. The timing, the desperation in Anthony's voice, the way everything was falling into place too neatly. Vinny reached for his father's letter, reading it again with fresh eyes. Blood doesn't always mean family. The words hit differently now. Not a warning about Anthony's desperation, but something else. Something that made Vinny's journalist instincts scream that he was missing the real story. He grabbed the phone and dialed the Tribune's night desk. Jimmy, it's Castellano. I need you to pull everything we have on Anthony Torino, cross-reference with Castellano. And Jimmy, check the obituaries from 1987, Tommy Torino. While he waited, Vinny paced his kitchen, his father's cannoli forgotten on the counter. The blackmail story made sense. Anthony desperate to hide his role in Tommy's death, bleeding money for decades to keep the secret buried. But blackmailers didn't usually escalate to kidnapping. They stayed in the shadows, content to bleed their victims slowly, unless they weren't really blackmailers at all. The phone rang. Vinny, you're not going to like this. Anthony Torino died in 1983. Car accident on the Belt Parkway. And Tommy Torino? He didn't die in 1947. Guy's still alive, runs a numbers operation out of Bensonhurst. The floor dropped out from under him. If Anthony Torino died 4 years ago, then who had been paying blackmail for 40 years? Who had just called him with that elaborate confession? And who the hell was the man he'd known as Uncle Anthony? Vinny's hands shook as he reached for his wallet, pulling out the business card Detective Morrison had given him at the precinct. But before he could dial, the phone rang again. Enjoying your family reunion, little brother? The voice was familiar but wrong, like hearing his own voice played back on a recording. Similar cadence, similar inflection, but harder around the edges. Cruel where his was merely cynical. Who is this? Come on, Vinny. You're supposed to be the smart one. The one who got out, built a respectable life, won all those journalism awards. Haven't you figured it out yet? The photograph on his coffee table caught the lamplight. His 16-year-old face standing next to his father. But now Vinny noticed what he'd missed before. Another figure in the background, partially obscured by shadow. Younger than Sal, but with the same build, the same dark eyes. Anthony isn't our uncle, Vinny said quietly. He's our half-brother. Bingo. Sal's first son from before he met your sainted mother. Born in 1925, raised in the life made my bones before you were even walking. And you know what the best part is? He really did love your mother. Watched her from a distance for years while you played happy family with the man who should have been mine. The pieces were rearranging themselves again, forming a picture so ugly Vinny could barely look at it directly. You killed Tommy Torino. Tommy was skimming from the numbers operation I was supposed to inherit. 2 birds, 1 stone. Frame Sal for the theft, eliminate the competition, and step into Tommy's shoes. Your Uncle Anthony has been me for 40 years, playing the role of the grieving brother-in-law while I built an empire in a dead man's name. Vinny sank into his chair, the full scope of the deception finally clear. You've been watching us. All these years, playing uncle, helping with money, waiting for the right moment to collect what's mine. You know what it's like, watching your half-brother's bastard son get everything handed to him? College, career, respect? While I stayed in the shadows building power you couldn't even imagine? The arrogance in that voice was breathtaking, but beneath it, Vinny heard something else, something that made him smile for the first time in days. You think this is about jealousy? Vinny laughed, harsh and bitter. You orchestrated 40 years of deception, kidnapped my daughter, destroyed my career, all because you wanted what I had. You poor bastard. You don't get it, do you? I spent 40 years running from this life. You spent 40 years chasing it, and you know what that makes you? Powerful, rich, feared. It makes you a fucking sad little boy playing dress-up in a dead man's clothes. You want my life so badly, but you'll never understand what makes it worth living. It's not the respect or the awards or the money, Anthony. It's the people who love you, despite knowing exactly who you are. The silence stretched long enough that Vinny wondered if the line had gone dead. Then, we'll see about that. Williamsburg Bridge, 1 hour, come alone, or start planning Maria's funeral. The dial tone buzzed in Vinny's ear like an angry wasp. He set the phone down with deliberate care, his hands steadier than they'd been in days. For the first time since this nightmare began, he could see the shape of his enemy clearly. Not Gotti's rage or some faceless mob vendetta, but something much smaller and infinitely more poisonous, a brother's 40-year tantrum. An hour wasn't enough time to mount a rescue, but it was enough to make sure Anthony didn't walk away clean. Vinny pulled out his tape recorder, the same one he'd used to interview hundreds of wise guys over the years, and began speaking into it, his voice calm and professional despite the circumstances. Vincent Castellano, Tuesday, November 3rd, 1987, 3:20 a.m. This is my statement regarding the murder of Tommy Torino in 1947 and the subsequent identity theft perpetrated by my half-brother. He spoke for 20 minutes, laying out every detail Anthony had revealed, every connection he'd pieced together. When he finished, he sealed the tape in an envelope addressed to Detective Morrison and left it prominently displayed on his kitchen table. Then he opened his father's letter one more time, reading between the lines he'd missed before. Blood doesn't always mean family. Not a warning about Anthony's desperation, a reminder that family was something you chose, something you built through love and sacrifice and showing up when it mattered. Maria had been his family for 26 years. Angela, despite knowing her for less than a day, felt more like family than Anthony ever had. The realization should have been crushing, that the man who'd taught him to drive, who'd walked him down the aisle, who'd held Maria as a baby, had been playing an elaborate 40-year con. Instead, Vinny felt something unexpected, relief. The love had never been real, which meant losing it didn't actually cost him anything. But Maria was real. Maria was everything. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, then stopped. On impulse, he walked back to the kitchen table and picked up one of his father's cannoli. The ricotta was still fresh, sweet, and creamy with just a hint of orange zest. Sal Romano might have been a thief and a coward, but he'd known how to make cannoli. Some small part of him had been worth saving. The streets were empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional taxi ferrying late-night drunks back to their empty apartments. Vinny drove through Brooklyn with the windows down, letting the November air bite at his face, keeping him sharp. He'd covered enough mob hits to know how these things usually ended. The bridge was perfect for it, isolated, with multiple escape routes, and water deep enough to swallow whatever needed disappearing. But Anthony had made one crucial mistake. He thought this was about power, about respect, about claiming some birthright he'd been denied. He'd spent 40 years studying Vinny's life from the outside, cataloging his successes and failures, but he'd never understood what actually motivated him. It wasn't ambition or fear or even love of the work itself. It was guilt. Guilt over the violence he'd documented but never prevented. Guilt over the families destroyed by the stories he'd told for public consumption. Guilt over building a career on other people's blood and calling it journalism. Anthony thought he was destroying Vinny by dragging him back into this world, but he was actually offering him something he'd wanted for 30 years, a chance to save someone instead of just writing about the people who couldn't be saved. The Williamsburg Bridge loomed ahead, its towers disappearing into low-hanging clouds. Vinny parked on the Brooklyn side and walked out onto the pedestrian walkway, his footsteps echoing in the pre-dawn darkness. The city stretched out below him, Manhattan's lights glittering like scattered diamonds, Brooklyn sprawling away into shadow. From up here, it looked peaceful, beautiful even. He found Anthony waiting at the midpoint of the span, leaning against the railing with studied casualness. In the pale light from the street lamps, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline, the same way of holding his shoulders when he was trying to look tougher than he felt. But where Vinny had grown soft around the edges from 40 years of desk work and moral compromise, Anthony had been hardened into something sharp and brittle. "You came alone," Anthony said, sounding almost disappointed. "I thought maybe you'd learned something about survival by now." "I learned that family isn't about blood," Vinny replied. "It's about choice. You spent 40 years choosing to hate me for a life I never wanted. I spent 40 years choosing to love a daughter who saved me from becoming you." Anthony's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "We'll see how much you love her when you're watching her drown." That's when Vinny saw the boat waiting in the shadows beneath the bridge, its engine idling quietly against the current. And standing at the bow, hands bound behind her back, was Maria. The sight of Maria on that boat hit Vinny like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain still, to keep his voice steady. 40 years of interviewing killers had taught him that desperate men fed on fear grew stronger when they sensed panic in their victims. "You always were dramatic," Vinny said, not taking his eyes off his daughter. "Even when you were pretending to be Uncle Anthony, bringing birthday presents and playing the good guy. Tell me, did any of it feel real to you? Or was it all just another performance?" Anthony's carefully composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. "You want to know what felt real? Watching your mother cry herself to sleep every night for 10 years. Listening to her talk about what a good man Sal was, what a loving father, while I sat at her kitchen table knowing exactly what kind of bastard she was mourning. So you decided to become him." Vinny kept his tone conversational, journalist calm, while his mind raced through possibilities. The boat was maybe 30 feet below them, too far to jump even if he could swim well enough to matter. But Anthony was talking, and talking men made mistakes. "You killed Tommy, took his identity, and spent 40 years playing house with your dead brother's family. That's not revenge, Anthony. That's just sad." "Sad?" Anthony's voice cracked like a whip. "I built an empire. I control 6 blocks of Bensonhurst, run numbers from Bay Ridge to Coney Island. I've got judges in my pocket, cops on my payroll, politicians who jump when I whistle. What did your respectability get you? A desk job writing other people's stories while I was living them." Vinny risked a glance down at Maria. She was looking up at them, and even at this distance, he could see she wasn't as helpless as Anthony thought. Her hands might be bound, but her body language was wrong for a victim, too alert, too ready. She was waiting for something. "You know what the difference is between us," Vinny said, moving half a step closer to Anthony. "You think power means making people afraid of you. I learned that real power comes from people choosing to trust you even when they don't have to." "Trust?" Anthony laughed, harsh and bitter. "Like Maria trusted you when you told her everything would be fine? Like your readers trusted you to tell them the truth while you built your whole career on a lie? Face it, little brother, we're more alike than you want to admit. The only difference is I stopped pretending to be better than what I am." "No," Vinny said quietly. "The difference is, I had people worth changing for." That's when Anthony pulled the gun, a snub nose, that looked almost delicate in his broad hands. Enough philosophy. You're going down to that boat, and we're all going for a ride to have a conversation about family loyalty. Unless you'd prefer, I just put a bullet in your head and let Maria watch you fall. Vinny held up his hands, but his eyes were fixed on something Anthony couldn't see from his position. Down on the water, another boat was cutting quietly through the darkness, running without lights but moving with purpose. Detective Morrison, maybe, or someone else who'd gotten his message. But they were still too far away to matter. Before we go anywhere, Vinny said, I want to know about my father. The real story this time, not whatever bullshit you've been telling yourself for 40 years. Anthony's grip on the gun tightened. Sal was a dreamer who thought he could play both sides. He was skimming from the numbers operation to pay for your college fund, convinced he could buy his way into respectability. When the family found out, they wanted him dead. Simple as that. But you volunteered to handle it because you thought it would win you my mother's love. I thought, Anthony's voice faltered, I thought she'd see that I was the one who'd been there all along, that I was stronger than him, better than him. Instead, she spent the rest of her life treating me like a pale substitute for a dead saint. There it was, the wound that had been festering for 40 years, the rejection that had twisted love into this poisonous obsession with power and control. Vinny almost felt sorry for him. She knew, Vinny said softly. She knew you killed him, didn't she? That's why she could never love you back. Anthony's face went white in the lamplight. You're lying. She left me that photograph for a reason. She wanted me to figure it out eventually, to understand what you really were. She played along with your charade to protect me, but she never forgot what you cost her. The gun wavered in Anthony's hand, and for one crucial moment, his attention shifted completely to Vinny. That's when the sound of sirens reached them, echoing off the water and the bridge's steel cables. And that's when Maria jumped. The splash echoed off the bridge supports like a gunshot, and Anthony's scream of rage shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Vinny lunged forward as his half-brother spun toward the railing, catching Anthony's gun hand just as he fired wildly into the darkness below. They went down hard on the concrete walkway, 40 years of suppressed hatred finally erupting into something primitive and desperate. Anthony was stronger, younger, but Vinny fought with the fury of a father watching his child disappear into black water. The gun skittered away into the shadows as they rolled, Anthony's fingers clawing for Vinny's throat. She's dead, Anthony gasped, his face twisted with something beyond rage. You killed her, just like you killed everything else. But Vinny could hear voices shouting from the water below, Coast Guard units converging on the splash point, searchlights cutting through the darkness. Maria had timed her jump perfectly, choosing the moment when help was close enough to matter. His daughter, the social worker who'd spent her career calculating risks for desperate people, had made the same calculation for herself. Anthony heard it too. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving him sprawled on the walkway staring up at the clouded sky with eyes that had finally run out of dreams to chase. 40 years, he whispered. 40 fucking years, and for what? Vinny pushed himself to his feet, ribs aching where Anthony had landed a solid punch. His half-brother looked smaller now, deflated, just another old man who'd confused violence with power for so long he'd forgotten the difference. You want to know what it was for? It was for this moment right here, when you finally had to look at what you really are. The police were on the bridge now, Detective Morrison leading a squad of uniforms up from both ends. Anthony didn't resist when they cuffed him, didn't even look up as Morrison read him his rights. He just kept staring at the sky like he was waiting for something that would never come. Your daughter's alive, Morrison told Vinny quietly. Hypothermic, but alive. They're taking her to Brooklyn Methodist. 3 months later, Vinny sat in his new office at the Brooklyn Eagle, not much bigger than a closet, with a view of a brick wall and radiator that clanged like a dying ghost. But the nameplate on his desk read Senior Investigative Reporter, and the editor had given him carte blanche to dig into whatever caught his attention, which, lately, had been a series of articles about corruption in city social services that was earning him the kind of enemies he'd forgotten how to make. Maria knocked on his doorframe, balancing 2 cups of coffee and a white bakery box. She moved carefully still, favoring her left shoulder where she'd dislocated it hitting the water, but the smile she gave him was pure sunshine. Brought you lunch, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. And before you ask, yes, I'm eating enough, Yes, I'm still going to therapy, and no, I don't need you to drive me to work anymore. He opened the box to find two perfect cannoli, the shells golden and crisp, the ricotta filling studded with chocolate chips. Where did you get these? Made them myself. Found Dad's recipe in Mom's things when I was cleaning out her apartment. She paused, watching his face carefully. I know it's complicated, but he was still your father. The good parts were real, even if everything else was a lie. Vinny bit into the cannoli and tasted memory, Sunday afternoons in his mother's kitchen, the smell of orange zest and vanilla, his father's hands patient and gentle as he taught a 6-year-old boy how to pipe filling without breaking the shell. Anthony had stolen 40 years, but he couldn't steal that. The trial starts next week, Maria said quietly. I know. Anthony had pleaded guilty to kidnapping and assault, but the murder charges for Tommy Torino were going to trial. Vinny would have to testify, would have to stand in open court and dissect his family's blood for public consumption one more time. But this time felt different. This time he was telling the story to save someone instead of selling papers. You don't have to go, Maria added. Morrison has enough evidence without your testimony. Yes, I do. Vinny set down the cannoli and met his daughter's eyes, eyes that had inherited her grandmother's kindness, but her father's steel. Some stories need to be told, even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. Outside his window, Brooklyn moved through another ordinary afternoon. Kids walking home from school, old men arguing politics on stoops, mothers pushing strollers through crosswalks. The same streets where 3 generations of his family had made their choices, good and bad, but somehow the weight of all that history felt lighter now. He had work to do, stories to tell, and a daughter who'd jumped into dark water trusting him to catch her. It was enough. It was everything.